What's going on, Bassmaster fans? Welcome into another episode of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. I'm your host, Ronnie Moore, and my co-host, Kyle Jessie. We're here for another episode in 2022. We mentioned in the last podcast episode, we're firing it back up for 2022, and this is going to be our season kickoff. We deemed it the season kickoff in the last one, but this is actually previewing our first event, which is the St. Johns River for the Bassmaster Elite Series. And Kyle, I think you're packing up. You're going to head down there, and by the time the fans are watching this podcast or listening, we are less than 24 hours from the kickoff of the season.
Yeah, I'm excited. It seems like every off season takes forever to roll back around to the season, but it's always kind of just like a moment of shock. Like it's happening this weekend. So definitely really excited to see how it plays out. And like we suggested a couple weeks ago, could definitely be some different conditions than we're accustomed to seeing. So it should be interesting.
Yeah, the St. Johns River is the first stop of the 2022 season, Palatka, Florida. We will go back-to-back as well. The next week, we'll be at the Harris Chain just across the state, and it's a very skinny state, so it's about an hour and a half over to the Harris Chain in Leesburg, Florida. So back-to-back Florida events, but we're going to see totally different things, and we will get a chance to preview the Harris Chain as well. But talking about the St. Johns, the biggest thing isn't the biggest topic this year isn't the lack of grass or is there grass, that type of thing. Basically, in 2016 was the last Elite Series season where we had a lot of grass on the St. Johns River. We had some hurricanes come through and some different things in that state that 2017 and 18 affected it. 2019, we showed back up. They had all those reed heads and those fish all flooded to the spawning areas, and they all got on bed during the tournament, which made it explode almost 100 pounds there. And then 2020, it got a little tougher because there was adverse weather, and then we compounded that with lack of grass. 2021, same kind of deal. But every single year, they're caught in different areas, and that's the coolest thing about this body of water. And so I think this year we're not talking about necessarily the lack of grass or if there's grass, but rather where will it be won and what is the weather doing? Because we've seen Florida, when the weather's tough and cold, it really affects those fish. So looking at the forecast, the lows have now dipped into the mid 30s and the highs are around 60, but we're really only getting a day and a half of sunshine. And that Wednesday, it looks like Wednesday, which is today when this is airing, Wednesday looks like the only day of like full sun all day long. And that is the off day. No one is practicing. So there could be fish on beds that were not there Tuesday on their last cast of practice. So weather's going to be something we keep an eye on this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something you and I have talked about in our previous podcast, was the fact that the most ideal scenario would be the cold weather to happen, before practice or during practice. And then we get a warm wave, something happens and the weather gets warm, the day before, like you said, with some sun leading into the tournament, that would force a lot of fish to the bank theoretically, and like I said, that could, recreate the 2019 scenario where everybody struggled in practice. It was awful, terrible. And then boom, you get to the tournament and there's fish everywhere where they weren't, a couple of days ago, like you just mentioned. So, that's what we're hoping for. But like you said, if you follow any of the anglers on social media, you've seen them all complain, and rightfully so, for how cold it's been in Florida. But somebody's got to catch them, and somebody will catch them. That's the reality of it.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint what the winning weight's going to be. We've seen it almost 100 pounds. We've seen it in the 80s. We've seen it 79 and change last year, but it was 79 pounds. And Brian New went from being 5th or 6th going in the final day to winning that event by 5 or 6 pounds. Or I think it was maybe more than 6 pounds. So 26 pounds on the final day for Brian New gave him 79 and change, almost 80 pounds, a 20-pound average, but it did not start that way. We had day one, half a day because of fog. We lost about 3.5 hours, almost 4 hours, which is the middle point of the day. We're about to cancel a day of competition, and they sent them just in time for the fog to clear, got that day of action in. But the 20 pounds a day average looked good, but it wasn't necessarily on pace for that with Brian New going into the final day. That 26 really jumped him up. What is that? 79 minus 26. He entered the day with 53 pounds in 6th place. 3 days in Florida and you're at 50, low 50s, and you're in the top 10 easily. That's the sketchy thing. We saw anglers like Gary Klaus have places to themselves, and they really had great limits for 2 days. And then all of a sudden they went from being, I'm going to catch 25 a day to I'm not going to catch 25 pounds the other 2 days combined. And so very, very different situations. And so I will kind of break down our playing field. When you look at Palatka, kind of on the St. Johns River, it is more than halfway down the fishery, north to south. Obviously, it flows from the south up towards Jacksonville. So I'm going to just be talking by the way we look at it on a map. It is on the lower half of the body of water, and everyone went basically from Palatka south before 2019 or in 2020. But we've seen Paul Mueller go above and go up towards Jacksonville and do well. We saw Kyle Welcher not too far away, but he caught a 10-pounder up there, and he really keyed in there on the final day of his rookie season. We've seen Rodman come into play as well. We had some leaders there and some big bags on day one of that event last year. We've seen Crescent Lake always factor with some of the old school guys. Crescent Lake seems like it is a 1970s fishery within the St. Johns River. Like, it seems like every time I look at the Bass Track map, not going to call them old heads, but I'm just going to go ahead and say the veteran of the veterans are always over there, and someone seemingly catches them out of there. Then you have Lake George, the single-handedly the fourth biggest body of water, if you counted just Lake George, in the entire state of Florida, which is huge. And then you've got all those springs. You've got Willaca, right above Lake George. And then you've got all those lakes below, like Dexter and whatnot, which we're getting in that Derek Hudnall, Matt Herron, Gary Klaus territory down there. So there's been a lot of places that have factored, and I'm kind of interested to see, is this the year that Rodman can get it done if those fish are not spawning at some point on the St. Johns River?
Yeah, and that's something that I think we could see. And the reason I say that is I had the opportunity to be on the water last year and see some of the things in Rodman. And it seems like, just from what I saw, I don't want to get too much in depth with it because, I don't, you don't want to give anything away that somebody might not know. But the reality of it is, like, a lot of the fish that were being caught there last year were not necessarily spawners, which obviously what we're potentially going to see this year is a lot of the same. So, it seems like maybe something of that nature where that would be more consistent, for 4 days straight versus, like you said, we see somebody get really hot first couple of days there and kind of fizzle off. If the weather stays consistent and somebody can find something in Rodman, it might play out to where they can really catch them for 4 days straight.
The biggest thing it seems like this event is turning into, and it has been with February weather, some years it's warm and they get a week of cold weather and then it's warm the rest of the year. That's all they had was 1 week of closed-toed shoes, the rest of the year open-toed shoes in Florida. But it seems like lately when we go to the St. Johns River, you're going to have to find fishing areas where you can fish. You're going to have to just find spots and patterns you can fish and hope maybe, oh, there's a bedfish over there. There's a bedfish over there. Oh, it's sunny one day. Let me go in this canal, catch an extra bedfish. You don't need, it seems, or you're going to lose if your key deal is bedfish. It seems like you need those to be your bonus fish, maybe a kicker
Absolutely.
Here and there, and you need to just have a fishing pattern. Brian knew throwing a lipless Berkeley war pig on some shell bars and then fishing lily pads and hard spots, channel swings, things like that. You've got those guys who are maybe fishing the hardcover like docks, all those stumps and Rodman. It seems like you're going to have to fish more than you're going to have to look. And it's really hindering the sight fishing bite and at least being able to find fish. Fish are always going to be on the bank in Florida, but when it's cold and cloudy during practice, you can't go look for them because they're not necessarily as easy. Yeah, you can't see them and they might not be there plentiful. So you can just get lazy and miss them. So you're not going to have that many places to go to on day one, but I can guarantee you someone's going to leave the dock in Palatka with a 10-pounder on their mind that they think that they're going to, whether they're going to see it, whether they're just blind casted to it. There will be some big ones, but I don't think there's 20 of them.
No, I'm with you 100%. And it seemed like last year we saw a lot of that, at least during the media day. The amount of stories I heard of people have some of the biggest bass that ever seen on bed. And the reality of it is I didn't see him at weigh-in. So let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
They didn't catch him. So
we all look at Bass Track and they have 7 pounds at noon. And I'm like, I guess they didn't bite this morning.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, maybe it turns out to where, you can have a couple days doing that. But like you said, I agree 100% that you're going to have a mixture of things, or like you said, somewhere you can just fish and you're not visibly fishing for them. Because like you said, seems like, especially when a tournament's not exactly full blown spawn, I don't think this is, who knows, could be wrong. but it doesn't seem like this would be the biggest wave of fish that, the St. Johns River is going to see this year come to the bank, unless something majorly changes from the forecast. And, with that being said, it's hard to rely on 4 days worth of bedfish, especially like you said, when you can't see them in practice, or at least not nearly as well. It definitely makes it way more difficult.
I know in my college experience of that feeling of you get a sunny day or an hour on the final day of practice of sun and you see 3 or 4 bedfish and you're like, oh my gosh, they're spawning and I haven't seen any. And so someone's going to find them, and you just burn your trolling motor batteries for the last hour, just looking and hoping to find 5 or 6 fish that you've basically created a whole pattern all week without them. But man, if you have them and you can catch 2 of them a day and you have 8 bedfish in your 20 fish tally by the end of the week, that could be enough to get it done. And so, like you said, the biggest wave of spawners, to set the scene for the folks watching and listening, Florida is different. We covered this a little bit in the first episode of 2022 for Inside Bassmaster Podcast, but everywhere else in the country needs a warm trend to get fish on the bank spawning. And in Florida, most fish are on the bank all year long, but it's whether they're spawning or not, it's hard to tell. But in Florida, the first wave of fish that spawn, at least maybe like on a Lake Okeechobee, is November. Like if you're catching spawners when there's turkey on the table, like you're catching them then, and then you get more cold fronts. And that's why they end up having waves from November all the way through April and May, like standard spawns for the Southeast and the mid-Atlantic and stuff. And so this could be the 3rd wave of fish, but I can guarantee you they probably haven't had a full-blown wave of any sort, maybe a fish here and there, but they probably haven't had a wave of fish spawning on the St. John's in 3 weeks. So if it does get sunny, if it does get 60 and some of those areas bake, like those canals or fish are waiting, around lily pads, and that sun bakes, a wave could pull up middle. We're going to hear guys at weigh-in, man, I wish I wasn't the first flight today and I was the 3rd flight because I saw them coming. And then the next day they get out there, it's 37 degrees for the low, and that's you're leaving from takeoff. So it's not 60 degrees like you left it the day before in the afternoon. It's in the low 30s, mid 30s, maybe low 40s when you head back out to find them again. So fish are going to be coming and going. They're going to be locked down. We're going to see guys probably flipping at spawning fish that don't bite today, but they'll bite tomorrow because they have to. When it gets colder, it takes them longer to lock on and stay. And so if you got 12 hours of 80-degree weather, they could lock on in the morning and bite in the afternoon. If you're getting 60 and it drops to 40, it could be a 12-hour ordeal or a 24-hour deal.
Sure. And how many times have you heard it said about Florida? Brian New hit on this a lot last year, is the fact that if you go through an area during practice and you just get a bite or 2, that could be all that it takes to know that a certain area of, whichever lake, which part of the river is good. And then if you can get those conditions to get right and be right, you'll see more fish, you'll get more bites there. And a lot of times that's the way it's going to play. And another thing is too, you got to realize, you and I know this, but most guys, when they're practicing, they're just trying to cover water, see as much as possible, or at least try to, basic point being, they're not fishing extremely, extremely slow. So, it goes back to, if you can get a couple bites in an area, like odds are, if you just really, really meticulously slow down, just like we see in Florida all the time. I mean, I'm not telling any fishing fan something they don't know. I mean, this happens every single year in Florida, or at least this time of year. But I think something like that could play again. Like you said, if we can get the right conditions, it might not be a deal where, Brian New was crushing them in those lily pads and doing that deal for 4 days straight. But once it got right and he was able to fish that area more thoroughly, bang, he jumps from, like you said, what is 6th or 5th, all the way, to the victory. So it's always interesting. Florida is such a day by day fit, really regardless of where in Florida you're fishing, it's day by day this time of year. So, you never feel like somebody's going to run away with it. And you never feel like you're out of it, if you're below the leaderboard.
Yeah, it is definitely day by day. And some of these anglers are wishing it would be hour by hour. They're hoping that, man, maybe come on, peek out, sun, just a little bit. And it could do something in my area. But you mentioned that. And I talked to Hank Cherry about that, 2-time classic champ. He mentioned, he's been here 5 times, different with grass, without grass. And he's got a couple key areas where he's caught fish every single year. They might not be the biggest, but they're fish. He knows that they're a population of fish, no matter what stage of the spawn they're in, live in this general area of the lake, and they're willing to bite, or this is how they react when they pull up, when they pull off. And so he hasn't even had to practice. So he's been able to practice completely new areas, looking for different things. And so that's the one benefit. If you know how to practice as an elite pro, if you've been here multiple times, you can now go ahead and eliminate areas, or you can expand areas, and you can keep those couple history places as ones that, hey, I don't need to practice there because I'm going to go in there with the full amount of confidence. I don't need to go practice it on the toughest practice day of the week and get discouraged. There's not a fish there. Go where you know, and then maybe if you find something better than that current week, you can start on that and maybe go to your history later. So it's going to be a very interesting event. I'm always excited. We've been to the St. John's quite a bit, and to give some background on that, we've been there almost 20 times, it seems. Yeah, maybe more than 20, but I look back at least Rick Clunn's record. I didn't want to peruse the whole Bassmaster record books, but Rick Clunn's been here since the mid 70s, just a couple years after Bass was originated. And he's been here about 19 or 20 times. So there's probably maybe 25 times that Bassmaster has been there, but it's only been 7 times for the Elite Series since 2006. So 2006 to now, this is going to be year 17 of the Elites, and we've only been there 7 times. It seems like a lot more because we've been there, I think, 4 times in a row and 5 of the last 8 years. And so it seems like a lot more, but for it being an iconic, historical, legendary fishery, we really took a big gap there from the early 2000s, the late 90s until the mid 2000s. We kind of took a 10-year break there, and now we've hit it back again, and it does provide some flair to the dramatic. And so I'm excited to talk Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing with you. I'm also excited to talk about Mercury Drain the Lake, and we're going to get some picks going. But for those who haven't played fantasy fishing, here's what you need to do. You need to go to bassmasterfantasy.com. You have to set your lineups before local time takeoff on day 1 of the event. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday, don't dilly-dally and say you're going to do it on Thursday morning. Do it before you go to bed Wednesday, because it will lock. The rosters will lock Thursday at takeoff, and some of those West Coast guys will get stuck because that's 2 or 3 a.m. for them. And some of the East Coast guys obviously get so entranced in live, they forget to set their lineup. So bassmasterfantasy.com, set your Rapala lineup for your 5-man team. Click over on the tabs to the right, Drain the Lake, and set your 8-man lineup. The one big difference, Kyle, lay it out for the fans, the difference between our 5-man lineup with Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing and our 8-man lineup with Mercury Drain the Lake.
So in Rapala Fantasy Fishing, like Ronnie said, it's split up into 5 buckets, and in each bucket you pick 1 angler. You can only pick 1 angler from each bucket, and there's no limit of how often you can use 1 angler per year. Well, if you go over to Drain the Lake, you get 8 picks from whoever you want. They're not divided. You can any 8 anglers that you want in the Bassmaster Elite Series field or the Classic when we get there. And once you use an angler, you can't use that angler again. So it's a one and done eliminator style game. So you have to choose wisely for sure, and really strategic. Ronnie and I really fell in love with this game last year because, somebody has a really good event and they want to brag and say whoop, 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 but you might have saved some guys for later in the season that are going to really come back and give you a huge advantage. So it's a big time strategy game. We both advise you to try to lay out who you're going to pick throughout the, per event, so you don't end up picking somebody and then later on in the year thinking, wow, I really wish I would have had John Cox for Lake Chickamauga, or, whatever the case may be. And one thing, Ronnie, if you're that person that has a problem with setting your lineup and forgets to set your lineup, that kind of thing, this year we're offering a new thing. It's the text alerts. It's basically a reminder. All you have to do is sign up on bassmasterfantasy.com. Right there below where your team is at, where you would set your buckets, you can sign up and we will send you a text message giving you a reminder. We obviously know that people are, busy in their lives and sometimes forget. It happens every single tournament to a lot of people. Really no excuse now. We've already been sending the emails, but now we're going to get the text. So if you're one of those people that tends to forget, sign up for the text reminders.
And it's good to also have an accountability partner. If you don't want Bassmaster texting you, get your buddy to text you. Everybody, everyone in the world is busy, Kyle, except for us, it seems, because they're all like, hey, man, you ready for the season? You excited? And they're texting us, and we're like, dude, I am so busy right now. I haven't even thought about the St. Johns River. Like, you've had your lineup set since December. I hadn't even opened the app since December, or the website since and it's 1 week for the event. So I just want to throw that out there to all my buddies who have texted me. I'm not lying. I literally set my lineup 2 days before the event because I need it. For one, the St. Johns River, you can be excited and you can pick chalk anglers. I got to look at the weather. I can't make a smart pick in my mind unless I look at what the weather's going to do, because it's totally different, especially with Mercury Drain the Lake. And I will say, man, I was excited for it last year because I feel like Mercury Drain the Lake separates your knowledge from the guys who know people and the guys who know lakes and people and techniques and with strong suits and all of that stuff, because you are one and done. Once you use an angler, you can't use them anymore. We had half the season last year. I think we had it was Neely Henry, or it was Lake Fork on. So it was Lake Fork, Neely Henry, Gunnersville, the Classic, and then Champlain and the St. Lawrence. And so it's about 6 events of our 10 event season. And I will say it wasn't too difficult to pick great teams. I did very well. I was excited about that. Dude, looking at a 10 event season, it is already harder than it was last year at max capacity, because I have to use, if you think about it, 8 people per team, 9 Elite Series events. So that's 72 anglers for the Elite Series that you're using no matter what. Then you have 8 anglers for the 10th event, which is the Classic. You'll want to dip from the Elite Series pool there as well. You can maybe risk it for the biscuit with the Opens and the Nation, like I did. I picked Chris Jones last year. He got top 5. Very, very good pick on for my team. And I was able to do that without dipping into the Elite Series field. But if you think about it, you have 80 anglers that you're picking from. Let's just say you go Elite Series, all events, all 10 events. That's 80 of the 94. You're picking everyone except for maybe 14 anglers from the bottom. And if you maybe pick a couple from the Opens and the Nation and the Classic, do that at your own risk, you're maybe going to leave 17 guys on the bench. Figuring out which 17 Elite Series pros and when they're not going to do well is very difficult. So I can already tell you, I'm in shambles. What I'm saying right now on the podcast and the YouTube episode of Fantasy Fishing, I may honestly change. I try not to change, but I may honestly change because I still have to look at some stuff and make sure. So let's get into the picks, and we're going to start with Rapala, Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. And Kyle, I'm going to let you go. We're going to go back and forth style, bucket A through E, and you give your pick. I'll give my pick, back and forth that way. So for bucket A, these are the top performers from Angler of the Year last year. It's 19 anglers, and it's the top, 16 or 17, plus some of the highest winning anglers that are joining the Elite Series from the Open. So we've got some other names in there that weren't in the AOI list last year that are bucket A anglers, no doubt. So give me your pick for the bucket A.
Yeah, so starting out hot here, we're going to go way out on a limb. I'm talking way out on a limb.
No, he's not.
And by that, I mean, we are not doing that at all. I'm going I don't know. I got to look at the percentage here. I don't know how many other people. 29.2% of people are going with Greg Hackney at this moment, and so am I. It seems like, obviously his history speaks for itself. Several top finishes here. Something that I looked up the other day, you'd have to go back over a decade since Greg Hackney started an Elite Series season with a finish outside of, I want to say it was 47th. It was never one outside of the 50 cut. He would have to go over a decade to find a finish in the first Elite Series event of the season, regardless where it's at, Florida or not, where he's basically outside of the more or less cut range. So, Greg Hackney gets out to a good start. Greg Hackney's, as big of a hammer as it gets in Florida. I'm going Greg Hackney.
That's a stat, and I'm the stat guy on Bass Live. That is a stat I did not know. What a great stat. It makes sense. He's always in the AOI contention off the bat, but man, not being below the 50 cut in a decade, that is incredible. So, and that's a big percentage though, and we'll get into the percentage talk as well. I'm going to go with a guy who has been on the elites for 4 seasons, I think. 2019, 20, 21, and this will be 22. This will be his 4th season. And I'm going to go with Drew Cook. Drew Cook at 2.5%. He's now a Georgia native on the hometown list, but he is from Tallahassee, Florida, that region, Midway, Florida. And that is where he has been, basically his entire life. He knows the St. Johns River because he grew up in the panhandle of Florida, went to Florida State in college as well. I feel like he is a great pick for a sight fishing event, which in Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, I do not have to worry about losing Drew Cook. I could pick him I could pick him every event if I wanted to.
Sure.
If they are sight oriented, he can do very, very well. No doubt. I don't think he's finished worse than 23rd in his couple of Elite Series events at the St. John's. So he's made that day 3 cut every time and then been close to the top 10, just right in the middle of that cut line. So 2.5% for Drew Cook. I'll take him because I also think last year when they weren't sight fishing as well, like he might have picked up a couple, but when it was predominantly fishing, he still had a great finish. So I feel like he's going to go into this event. I'm going to fish. And if I find a sight fish, awesome. Now, the key is for fans. Do not hop on the Drew Cook and Drew Benton bandwagon from pre-practice reports of I saw 40 pounds on the bed, because I think they are 0-3, and I will tell it to them in a text right now. I'll tell them, I could text them to them right now. I'm not going to show their phone number on the screen, but I could text them right now and say, boys, you are 0-4 on your 25-pound plus bags on day 1 sight fishing. You did it at Lake Fork to me last year. You've done it at the St. Johns River before. So just be wary of the social media reports that they're catching them or they saw big ones, because it doesn't always turn out. So bucket A, I'm going with Drew Cook because of the fishing aspect, not the sight fishing aspect. So I'm going to go ahead. And you got any qualms with that? You got any?
No, I don't know. I was going to say, this is something you kind of hit on a second ago. One of the most tough things is picking a team way out in advance, which is what I do every single time because I write a column for Bassmaster.com and for Bassmasterfantasy.com. And I made these picks 3 weeks ago at least. So I'm like Ronnie. I don't like to go back and change my picks. I try to stay true to what I'm trying to, I guess, suggest to everybody to pick. But like Ronnie said, I would have a lot of I have a lot of confidence in Greg Hackney regardless where we're fishing.
Oh yeah.
But now the way it's setting up, I'm really kind of on your side of things, thinking that it really opens it up for some guys in bucket A. And naturally you see the percentage that you said for Drew Cook, and you're like, wow, how is it only 2.5%? But then you look at bucket A and you're like, wow, there are a lot of guys in here that could easily win the tournament, not just finish well, but win the tournament. Patrick Walters being another one. If you want to get on the social media train, he posted a big picture of I don't know how big of a fish, but it was a giant. He's one of the ones that I think tapped into something last year that could potentially play again this year. So like Ronnie said, a lot of these picks, at least I can say for myself, I picked a long time ago. So if they don't do well, don't hold it against me, because this was back before I knew what was going to happen.
And I will say, Kyle, to your credit, Greg Hackney has finished second twice at the St. Johns River. He did it in 2016 to Rick Clunn. He did it last year to Brian New. He's always had great finishes, not only to start the season, like you mentioned, but at the St. John's, he's great here. I honestly think he's only caught 2 double-digit fish in Bassmaster Elite Series events. I think he said this, and I remember it. He's caught 2 double-digit fish in Elite Series events. We've been to Falcon, Fork, Amistad, Okeechobee. We've been everywhere. And I think both of them were at the St. Johns River. So Greg Hackney just loves being able to just dive his cricket around, as he likes to say, and just do it. So he's deadly no matter where we go. But yes, I think he really wants a win here. Like, I feel like he's got a kind of a grudge against it. He won't say he wants to win every event, but 2 seconds and a couple 10-pounders, I think he'd love to get the W. And
to your point there, another statistic I'm reading based on something I'd looked up, in 5 different trips to the St. John's, never finished below 16th. So like you said, 2 seconds. But I mean, as far as just consistency, a lot of times
get you 3 days. Yeah.
A lot of times you see, he's got a second and then he's got an 80 second. It's like, well, what am I getting
Yeah.
here? I mean, when you get that consistently, good up in the top 20, I mean, it's hard to, even at a higher player percentage, it's hard for me not to go with a Greg Hackney in bucket A. But with that being said, I'll let you get on to bucket B if you're ready to go there.
Yeah, I think this kind of goes against the norm for his style and what he's good at, because I always think of Buddy Gross as a grass fisherman. He's a great grass fisherman. Chickamauga has grass, but it's not like, necessarily a ton of underwater grass, and that's his home lake. We've seen him at Pickwick do well with the submerged vegetation. There's not any of that at the St. Johns River anymore. And hopefully, I've talked to Gene Gilliland, our conservation director, Hall of Famer as well in the Bass Fishing Hall of Fame, about like what we could do as Bassmaster to maybe make the St. Johns River come back with grass. Obviously, hurricanes, high water, other situations have affected that, but I'm picking Buddy Gross, even though he's a great grass fisherman, because he's a great offshore fisherman in general. And I think shell bars have really, I don't think many Elite Series pros thought about shell bars from 2015 and earlier, the first 10 years of the Elite Series. I don't think anybody heard about that or thought about that. They just looked at the bank, they looked at the grass, they looked at the lily pads, and they went to work. But with the lack of grass, with the colder temperatures we've experienced, and cliff prints being really good, a lot of people have kind of figured out there are a lot of shell bars. You got to figure out which ones are going to play and what you're going to use to catch them. And I think that Buddy Gross is a pretty safe pick, a 28th and an 11th in his 2 trips to the St. John's. He had a great finish at the Kissimmee chain last week for the Opens. So I think that Florida is probably, it doesn't seem like it would be good for Buddy Gross, but I do think that whether he's fishing offshore or fishing submerged grass, I think Florida sets up well for him while he's been on the Elite Series. So I'm going to go with Buddy Gross, 5.1% there in bucket B. That is very affordable to me if we were actually like using some kind of money structure on paying for it. I think that that's a very affordable, a good bargain, what you're getting from him performance-wise versus the cost of entry, basically.
Sure. And I like that pick, actually. I was half tempted to do that as well. Based on the fact that last year on the water, the first day we did cover Buddy Gross. It was one of the first anglers we pulled up to. And I was amazed how well he was able to, like you just mentioned, make the St. Johns River set up to his strengths. He didn't have to be up there punching, grass or, daubing a cricket and lily pads. Not saying he can't do that. But, when you think of Buddy Gross, you typically think of his offshore fishing. So I do like that pick a lot. And at 5%, fantastic.
And I will say one last thing about that is that some of these guys who do fish offshore, they may not catch a 7 to 10 pounder. We're going to see that from those guys who maybe go flipping all day or top water or sight fishing, things like that, or a spinner bait like, Rick Clun showed and different things. But I will say some of those guys who fish offshore, they're more likely to bring in 5 3-pounders. They're going to have 15 pounds. It's going to be consistent 15 pounds. It's not a 7-pounder and 4 that went for 8, and so that's the thing in Florida, to interpret their weights. Look at their fish holds on day one of the event to see what they're on. Because if a guy holds up 2 3.5 pounders or 2 4-pounders, that's solid. That's really consistent if he's got a good bag overall. If you see a guy hold up a 9-pounder and he's got 19 pounds, he's got 4 for 10. Now you're not going to go and I'm not going to take that 19 pounds. No, you're going to take it all day long. But if that guy fades later in the event because he doesn't get a 9-pounder every day, you now know why, because he's on a quantity of small ones and one big bite. So he's really heavily invested on getting that one big fight. Those guys who fish offshore, maybe catching more fish, they actually get consistent rather than a bunch of little ones, like we see at other offshore events. So I will say that one thing, that just be aware of the weigh-in photos when you see them. That kind of gives you a feeling on projecting the top 10 cut.
Now that's a really good point and a really good tip for, the tournament moving forward after, day one. So bucket B, I'll be honest, and I didn't really realize this until I started going through the buckets. I'm probably not going where you think I'm going. I pick chalk way more than I normally do. So I love playing the percentages. I 9 times out of 10 do that. I've been ridiculed by some for doing that, which whatever. Ronnie and I can get into that later, why you'd go with a player with lower percentage. But For the most part, I did not this go around. With that being said, my bucket B is going to be John Cruz. So the part that made me a little hesitant of that was the fact that he's had some really, really good finishes here, a couple top tens, but and other finishes with inside the top 50. But last year he did
lately.
Yeah. Last year he did not have a great finish though there at at the St. Johns River. That's one of those situations like I was just talking about in bucket A. You like to really, really see the super high consistency over a course of events. But that's not always super, likely. You can't, you're always going to have a bad tournament, even if it's on a place that you've been to a handful of times. You're liable to have a bad tournament. It's just fishing. So with that being said, even at 14.9%, I'm going to go with Cruz in B. That's, like I said, higher than I would like, but the reality of it is there's Swindle with 17 and change, Porosnik at 15 even, Benton at 12.8. I mean, there's a handful of higher percentage guys in the bucket. So I like my odds with Cruz, and like I said, I just like his history of success. That's pretty much what got me on Cruz. And like I said, for somebody that has been to the St. Johns River that much, even a lot of the newer guys around the 2019 timeframe, we've been every year since. But the guys like Cruz, the Princes, the Hackneys, the guys that have been here a handful of times, even before that, it's just an extension of knowledge of the river. So I'm going to go John Cruz in bucket B.
And I like that pick. And I kind of thought you were going to go there. I thought you were going to mention Jacob Prosnick and Drew Benton being two of the best sight fishermen on the Elite Series, but that it's not setting up for sight fishing necessarily. Sure. We got to see John Cruz on Bassmaster Live day one last year because he had done so well so many times at the St. John's. We put him on camera. He caught a 7-pounder on day one, but he didn't have much to go with it. And we saw a day two, a tough day two, and not a great finish. And so I think that you're on a good track with Cruz there. And like you said, it's a higher percentage you want, but he's still the third highest in the bucket. It's not even like he's the highest, because don't worry, when we talk about the percentages, we're going to both get into some high percentages later in these buckets that we have to go with. But explain the percentages a little bit, and I'll kind of give my take on it. But when you think about it, if you're picking your fantasy fishing team and you're looking at a guy and he has 75% pick, it says pick percentage 75%. That is basically saying that if there is 10,000 fans picking fantasy fishing, 7,500 of them are picking that guy. So there's two ways to look at that. You pick him as well, because you don't want to lose. If he does really well and you don't pick him, you're going to lose points, whether it's 5, 10, 15, or 100. You're going to lose points to 75% of the player base. You're losing a huge chunk of points to a lot of people. So you can get behind in a hurry and can't really win if that happens. But the other way around, if you do pick a sneaky 3% guy and he does overwhelmingly better than the high percentage guy, let's just say the high percentage guy stumbles, like we've had a couple guys do this last year, like a Rick Clun last year, he had a high percentage and he didn't do well. You pick somebody different than that and you beat 75% of the player base by 5, 10, 15, 100 points. And so it's kind of a fine line to do it. You hedge your bets. If you do low percentage sneaky guys and you need to ride the train of a big fantasy pick to not lose momentum with other people, then you got to do that. And so there's a time where you pick high percentage guys. There's a time where you pick low. And really this first event, it's kind of open season, because at the end of the year, the percentages will affect you more based on where you are in the standings on if you need to make up points or you need to maintain points. That's my outlook on it. No,
and you hit the nail on the head. I don't even really have a whole lot to add, but I think that's the main key of what you said there. What I try to explain to people is, that's how you distance yourself from a huge percentage of people, is if, like you said, you can pick that lower percentage guy that, doesn't even have to be the best finisher in the bucket, just better than the super high percentage player. And you're going to distance yourself. You're going to have a lot of, like I said, really distance between you and that, that group of people that selected that guy. Like you said, there's certain advantages, of course, to picking the high percentage guys. A lot of times you feel like you don't have a choice just because the guy is so well, which once again, we're going to get to. But, I think that being a little bit risky, and let's be honest, it's a gamble, right? So, I mean, a lot of times you might look at that high percentage guy and think, well, he's probably going to do well. I'm not picking against him because I don't think he's going to do well. I just think that, like you said, a sneaky 3 or 4% guy, I think in my mind has as good of a chance, if not a better chance, to do well in this, event. And a lot of times that'll pay big dividends for you.
And that's the hardest thing is there's 19 anglers in each of these buckets. Basically, I think it's 19 for the first 4 buckets. And then the last bucket is 18 anglers. So basically just around 20 anglers per bucket. And so if one angler has 50% of the fan vote, the 50% of the shares for the picks there, that means 19 or 18 other anglers combined have 50%. So now it's even harder to pick the needle in a haystack because the percentage isn't distributed between 3 or 4 guys in that bucket like we've seen in the first couple of buckets. It's distributed by one guy. So now you have 18 affordable picks. You've got 18 guys that are going to be on average 5% based on 18 times 4% is going to be about half of the percentage. Right. So that's the thing now is it is a smart move to not pick the high percentage guy. But also, who do you pick? You could pick a 3% guy and the other 3% guy does so much better. So then you got a lot of options. So that's the percentage deal. I wanted to break that down before we move farther into the buckets. So give me your bucket C, since we've both done our picks. I've got Drew Cook and Buddy Gross, and you have Greg Hackney and John Cruz for our first 2 buckets.
So some people may not know this, but do you know what C stands for in bucket C?
Catch you off guard.
Canterbury, that's what it stands for.
Oh, okay, Canterbury
in bucket C. Kind of the same exact pick in a way as the Cruz pick, right? So he's got some really, really good finishes. 2019, really, really solid finish. Actually, 2 top 10 finishes in 2019, 2020, back-to-back seasons. It's like, wow. I remember even picking him last year in bucket. I guess it would have been I would have think A or B.
A or B. And I picked him as well.
He was one of my lower picks or lower, players as far as success goes. And that was really, that was difficult to understand.
It sucked.
Yeah, just say it how it is. It was difficult to understand because I was like, how consistent he was over the course of 2 years. And then year 3, and he has a bad finish. Not to mention, Scott Canterbury had a tough season last year. I mean, we're talking about a former Angler of the Year 3 years ago, I guess 2019, of course. And I just see him breaking out of that at the St. John's River. Like I said, I made this pick far before seeing this, but I saw he posted a picture today with some nice ones on Instagram. You try not to play that game, but like I said, when I make my picks so far in advance, I'm going to stick with them. So when you see those things, you can rest easy that, hey, this might be a good pick. But there was also a picture of a giant bowfin or grinnell or whatever you want to call it. So I don't really know how to distinguish between the success of those two. But no, I'm going to go with Scott Canterbury to bounce back in C.
What was his percentage?
My bad. His percentage was at 6.8. So
6.8.
That's a comfortable region. I'm completely fine with that. In the same bucket, I mean, you're talking about John Cox at 30%, 31%, Scott Martin at 19.4%, Brian New, of course, the champion last year at 16%. So there's definitely some people to take away the percentage. Hence the reason I kind of like the Canterbury pick, and I just like the prospect of him bouncing back this year overall.
Yeah, his actual areas that he's normally done well in the past at the St. John's was the area that ended up winning the event last year. And so not to give it away, nobody's going to go do it because they're not listening to this podcast the night before the tournament. But that's the thing that's intriguing about Canterbury's slip up last year. And honestly, bucket C, it doesn't stand for Canterbury. Bucket C stands for Clark, because I'm going with Clark Wendlandt, another Angler of the Year winner. Both guys coming off Angler of the Year wins in their first 3 seasons on the Elite Series, and both missing the Classic for 2022. Both of them finishing below 50th in the points. Incredibly difficult season, with it being shallow in nature, having 2 events up north. One of them you can fish shallow on at Champlain last year. They didn't catch them. They didn't have a great season at all. So it's very surprising, maybe a bounce back for them. But for Clark, he has great finishes. He had 55th his first year on the Elite Series, but he missed the Classic that year as well. And in the last 2 years, his AOY year and then his subpar season this past year, he had 16th and 14th as I look at my notes. So 2 top 20 finishes there. A little bit of sight fishing involved for sure. He's one of the best at that, even at his age. They often say one of the things, I guess it's maybe your hand speed when you're a baseball player when you get older goes first. Sometimes for fishermen, your vision starts to go first and you're not a sight fisherman anymore, but Clark still seems on the up and up there. And so 2.1%, I'll take Clark in that one. And maybe both of these guys will get back in their AOI form for 2022. And it starts at the St. John's, which is a place that they've both done well. And we talked about it. It was the elephant in the room a little bit. As we get into bucket D, this is kind of the bottom tier of Angler of the Year guys, except for a couple, and it's got some more rookies mixed in as well. But those guys who are maybe, if we had close to 100 anglers last year, this is guys that were probably 68th to 80th, 68th to 85th in the point standings. And so it's hard to decipher if it was a slip up, who's going to start out strong, but I've got to go. I've got to do it. And I think we're going to do it at the same time. I'm going to give us a 3, 2, 1 count. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Cliff Prince. Okay. We got to do it. We have to do it.
Best friends.
we just became best friends. So I think that Cliff Prince is a no doubter. And you can give your reasons why as well, but I'm going to throw stats out there that'll reinforce both our reasons. A 7th, 4th, 17th, 6th, and 16th. That is 5 top 20s in his 6 Elite Series trips to the St. Johns River. The other one was 56th, just barely missing the cut. A couple of those finishes should have been victories. 6th in 2016, should have won that event. I covered him the whole event almost. He had a live well malfunction. He turned the wrong pump switch on, so he had no water flowing in his live well on the correct side where all the fish were. He ended up not being able to cull up at all on day one because his fish passed away. He had a penalty there. He had to come back from 90th on day one to finish 6th in that event. He could have very well won that event. 4th and 7th and 17th. We've really got to see him fish offshore. We've seen him switch it up. We've seen him fish canals and kind of coves and man-made structures like that. I feel like if there's a guy that can go above Palatka and get it done consistently, not just one year or another year, but every year, he could be the one that makes that work, especially if the other shell bars get populated, if other places get, this or that, if there is a fog delay again. I just feel like the worse the weather gets and that mid-30s lows for the nights and the cloudy and rainy conditions, that just screams Cliff Prince. And I will eat that 47% percentage all day long, because I don't think that there's a pro that's maybe performed better on their home body of water consistently like he has.
Yeah, and to your credit, in my story, I said that if Cliff Prince was at 100%, I would have selected him in bucket D, and that's the truth. Because the results speak for themselves. He's the true local. He's proved it time and time again. Something that you just hit on is, I spoke to an Elite Series pro the other day, and they were kind of echoing the same thing you said. If this tournament becomes one where it gets really tough, like everybody's kind of scratching their head. If there's one person who I bet has got an answer for that head scratching, I'm going to say it's Cliff Prince. And once again, I'm not going on a limb by saying that, but I feel like you have to feel pretty confident that if you have Cliff Prince in your fantasy lineup, you're not going to tank entirely, because there's a really good chance Cliff Prince, will do just fine. With that being said, I will say this, because, this bucket D will take shorter because we both have the same person. I was really disappointed to see that Mark Menendez was in bucket D as well, because he's one of those guys kind of that you mentioned, the old school, type of guy that has done really well at the St. Johns River. And he's at a fairly high percentage as well, 15.5. And I was tempted to go with it, but it's like you said, it's really hard to bet against Cliff Prince on the St. Johns River. And but I will say that I kind of wish that Menendez was in another bucket so we could talk more about that, because he's another one that I got the opportunity to watch in person last year and cover. And then obviously, his success in 2019, of course, some of the crazy fish catches in that event. It's definitely a place he does really well. But yeah, definitely sticking with Cliff Prince with you on that one.
And I think honestly, there's 94 Elite Series pros. There's 93 other than Cliff Prince. I feel like if the other 93 are like, I want to win, but if I can't, I am cool with Cliff Prince winning, because at a certain point, this would be the cherry on top of his career. He may quit right then on the stage in front of his hometown crowd and be like, I'm done. I've won at my home. To see him, I get a little sentimental about it, to see him show up in front of friends and family and locals who admire him, show up every single season and bring it. That's so cool. So if I'm picking a favorite that sentimentally I want to see win, I would love to see Cliff Prince win, to put that cherry on his career. And, I think that the recipe for this event, man, we say that every single time. It's kind of trashy weather. It's setting up for him, and then it gets warm for a day or two, and someone else can find a big bag. It ain't getting much better in the projections. I don't feel like this weather's going to take off and be amazing during the event. I feel like it's going to be maybe a little warmer than it is now, but it's not going to be, the biggest thing to look at is the highs could be 80 every day. But if the lows are in the 30s, you're erasing yesterday's progress and you're starting again. And it takes them half a day to get acclimated again, compared to a 80-degree day and a 50-degree night. Or I would honestly say a 55-degree low and a 65-degree high is much more conducive for Great Florida fishing than a 35-degree low and an 80-degree high. I know the high is really important. That low just kills it so much. So with the weather the way it is, I feel like this is, once again, setting up for Cliff Prince, because he could do it all at the St. John's. But it's really setting up for it not to leave him. This pattern should not leave him. He should be able to sustain that throughout the event. And you can basically check him off for a solid 14 to 15 pounds guaranteed minimum. He's going to figure out how to catch that, which is always a safe thing to get you to day 3. That's really what I'm looking for, is guys to get to day 3. Maybe they pop off and can make the final day, but you need all 5 of your guys to make the final day, make day 3.
And you kind of hit this a second ago, but the reality of it is it's really the equalizer when you get all these fish heading to the bank and you get these fish locking on, because once again, something that we hit on last podcast was the fact that Cliff Prince obviously has the most history of anybody here. With that said, these are the best fishermen in the world, and a lot of these guys, almost all of them, all have a lot of experience for a body of water they don't live on, or they might not fish frequently for fun, obviously, like Cliff Prince. They've spent so many days on the St. John's River that when that happens and those fish hit the bank, it's really kind of an equalizer. And, I'm not saying that, he's not going to be in good shape if that happens. He pretty much proved he's going to catch them regardless. But at the same time, for it to set up to give him a true advantage, you always hear about that, whether it's Cliff Prince on the St. John's River or not. You almost always look at the local and think their advantage is probably at its best when it's tough, because that they have that experience, they have that history when it's tough, as where when patterns change and things change, some of the guys might not have the answers, but like you said, if the weather stays the way it looks like it might, like you said it best. We say this every year, but it really could be Cliff Prince's time to shine and get that victory.
Well, and I'll say this, we saw it last year. Crazy floods on the Coosa River. Wes Logan, a local who knows a lot. Adverse conditions, the fishing wasn't on fire, was able to win that event. The biggest shock in the fishing industry is that Lee Livesey, when the fishing was on fire, won the event. Normally, locals can thrive when it's tough. And so I think that if it did blow wide open, I don't think Cliff Prince is out of it at all. But when it does set up a little tougher, I think it helps him out a whole bunch. That's why you see some of those Grand Lake Classics, those Oklahoma guys show up when it's really cold, when the coldest classic and the toughest classic on record, probably temperature-wise. Casey actually shows up at Hartwell and wins. That he needed that. And so I think that we're on par with that, and we've made that point. But I love that, man. Cliff Prince is a great dude, great story. We will be able to see him live on day 1 with a camera in the boat and see how he goes about it. And he never disappoints. Going into bucket E, I'm going to let you pick first, since I picked Cliff Prince. And even though we did a 3-2-1 count, I still picked him first. So go ahead.
I'm going back to the high play percentage. Like I said, I typically don't like to do this, and we should play this one differently for me, in the sense that I've got a pick, and I've got a pick that I'm starting to wish I would have made. So the pick I made is going to be Justin Atkins. So Justin Atkins had a great finish here last year. I want to say somewhere in the 20s. I don't have that statistic up. I definitely made the cut, not the final day cut, but the Saturday cut. You know, one of the biggest surprises last year, I feel like for a lot of people, was Justin Atkins' lack of success on the Elite Series. That's not to say he's not one of the best, because he deserves to be there. But at the same point, he had a tough season. I don't think there's anybody in the Elite Series field, and this, I'm sure everybody's just equally as motivated, but it seems like there's nobody that would be more motivated to get out to a great start at the first event of the season, more than Justin Atkins. Like I said, last year, having the opportunity to talk to him before the event, he seemed really comfortable. And like I said, he never felt like he was, lost, I guess, if that makes sense. So maybe not the same, amount of history as some of the guys in the field, but I do like his chances to bounce back this year for sure. 23.6 player percentage. Like I said, higher than I'd like. I want to say probably the highest in the bucket.
Which is saying something with Rick Clunn, and there's a lot of guys who should have high percentages, and so for him to have the most, that's saying something as well.
For sure. And the other pick, I'll let you make your pick, because I don't want to accidentally steal your pick. We don't know each other's picks, but I don't want to accidentally say something. So I'll let you go on Bucket E, and might hit on something afterwards.
Yeah, and I will just follow up on your pick, Justin Atkins. You're allowed to have 2 bad seasons on the Elite Series if you've been around for a decade. If you haven't been around for a decade, you can't have your first 2 seasons on the Elite Series be bad, because they will be your last 2 seasons on the Elite Series. The cut is getting so difficult. Right. So not only is he motivated to show I belong here, but he actually has to prove I belong here with his finishes. And so it's going to be a make it or break it season, but he is a top 25 angler in talent, and it's just rolling it into consistent finishes. And last year, tumultuous weather, flooding, I know everyone dealt with that, but man, that can throw an Elite Series first-year guy off, because I just did this on this body of water I've never been to, and now it's 7 feet deeper right there, and it's chocolate milk. What do I do? So even on his home lake, it threw him for a loop. So I like the pick, and I wish him well. He's one of the best individuals and I fished against him in college, and I love Justin Atkins, but I think I'm going to go with Jason Williamson. Man, it's hard to have an Elite Series champion in Bucket E that's still young and in his prime. I feel like I don't fishing's prime lasts a lot longer than others, but I feel like he still has the ability to do everything he did when he won events. I don't think he all of a sudden peaked, his first 2 years in the elites when he won. So I think that Bucket E, I don't think that we'll see Jason Williamson there long this season. 1.6%. One thing that I like is that he seemingly doesn't have that many bad finishes in Florida. They may not be top 10s, they may not be top 20s all the time, but he doesn't have any bombs. And I will say the only bomb that he's had at the St. Johns River was last year, and that's the reason he's in Bucket E, is because his whole season was a bomb. Jason, you're very tall. Do not hurt me for saying that, but you'll look at the AOI standings and say, I did probably bomb the season. But 71st last year in probably his worst Elite Series season he's had. Otherwise, it was an 11th. His first time coming here, 34th, 43rd, and 31st. So he's seen it with grass and without grass. He's seen it sight fishing, not sight fishing. So I feel like Jason Williamson could kind of regain that Florida spark. One good thing in his corner, got a top 15 at the Kissimmee Chain Open last week as well. That's some good momentum in the state of Florida. Break the rust off. And for that percentage, honestly, Rick Clunn was in studio a few weeks ago. I can't trust Rick Clunn. Gary Klaus was the day 1 and day 2 leader last year. Those were the only 2 limits he caught all season before he had to have his surgery on his shoulder and his nerves in his neck. And those are just stats and facts, and so it's very difficult to go off history of people who've done well here because of that. Paul Mueller, he's won here as well. Not that great of a season last year. A lot of changes coming his way, and so it's interesting to see how they rebound and who can rebound, who can garner that success again. So I'm gonna go with Jason Williamson because I feel like he's seen it enough, he's proved enough in Florida, and he's got a little bit of momentum starting out of season.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really good pick. The one pick I was going to hit on in bucket E that I feel like is another lower percentage guy is Clint Davis. I think that could be a really good pick in bucket E. Looking at his finishes on the St. Johns River, 2021 20th, 2020 42, 2019 41. Then back in 2016, obviously didn't have a great year overall, so it's kind of hard to say. But there's a 97th finish. But if you look at his finishes, they're very consistent. Obviously no top 10s in there, but a 20, a 20th in 2021. Another guy that should be super motivated. Obviously had to sit out last year after the Classic with a rotator cuff. I want to say it's a shoulder issue of some sort. Another guy that could definitely be super motivated to get out to a good start. I like Clint Davis in E2. If you didn't want to pick one of the guys that you and I went with, there's another option for you.
There is an option there. And I will say, we didn't pick any rookies. Neither one of us picked a rookie this season. There are 13 new anglers. 3 of them are returning Elite Series pros: Mike Iaconelli, Jacob Peraznik, and David Williams. And then the other 10 are all deemed rookies. And when we go down that list, there are some Midwestern guys. There are some really young guys. I think there's 3 guys or 4 guys under the age of 25, 26 coming into the Elite Series. We've got a guy from Honolulu, Hawaii, Matty Wong, winning the nation championship. He gets to compete the next 2 years on the Elite Series at least. All these guys get a kind of a pass their first year. It's not a pass because it still is held against them, just not until after year 2. So you got to make sure you do well. We had 6 rookies last year out of the 9 eligible for Rookie of the Year make the Classic. So I think that says something about the rookies coming in, but there are a lot of people who are really far from Florida and that have maybe never fished down in this state on a tournament, and it's going to be difficult on how to get your wheels under you. So I'm excited to see those new fresh faces. But yeah, it's hard to get. I can't gamble. I love them. I'll send them a Christmas card. Can't pick you in the first event of the season, bud. Sorry. So that's just my thoughts on the rookies. It is a good crop. It is very interesting to see how the youngsters perform. We've also got a couple of veteran tour pros. Joseph Webster, Josh Douglas made the Elite Series and are both doing it as well. We've got 2 Asian influenced anglers with Masayuki Matsushita and Daisuke Aoki. Those guys, honestly, I looked it up. Every Japanese angler that comes over, Taku Ito included, Marizo, Ken Iobi, all the guys in the past, Takahiro, they all look pretty young. I will say they age very well. I looked at Daisuke Aoki. He looks like he's 15 years old and he's 39. So these guys are veterans of fishing. They caught me off guard. I'm like, man, I'm going to put him in my 30 anglers under the age of 30. He ain't under the age of 30, that's for sure. And I think Masayuki's 38. So we've got some guys that are veterans in age, and they're going to be coming into their first Elite Series season. So we'll see how they handle that as well. And the opposite end, some really young guys. We got some guys who just got their driver's license like 2 years ago. So they just started towing boats. Very cool to see the college influence as well coming in. So we got a couple of those.
Yeah, every season we do this, but it's the reality. Every season you have such an interesting cast of rookies and newcomers, and stout rookies and newcomers. And a huge part of that is the fact that the St. Croix Bassmaster Opens have become, just incredibly difficult to qualify for the Elite Series. So, if there's a guy on this list, obviously Matty Wong didn't qualify through the Opens, but the majority of these guys, if you look at it, the reason they're here is because they had to go through it. They earned it, basically is what I'm getting at. So like you said, for the sake of fantasy fishing, it is tough to pick some of these guys, especially when you've got so many anglers that have so much history on the St. John's. It's kind of hard to justify wanting to go with a rookie, but I would be willing to bet just about anything that there's going to be one of these true rookies, not even just a newcomer, that'll be in the top 20, maybe even the top 10 by the end of it. It's liable to happen. It's just so hard to predict that right now that, like you said, it's hard to do, but it's definitely going to be an interesting season for these rookies.
I think I picked two last year. I picked KJ Queen and I picked Josh Straisner. And I said at the beginning of the year, Josh Straisner was going to be the rookie of the year. I haven't released my pick for this season, so bribes are still welcome for any of these rookies who want some love. But he ended up winning rookie of the year, stout class. KJ got a good finish here. So did Josh. So they can have good finishes. And I'll even say Matty Wong, he didn't beat the opens field of tough guys. But he beat the nation, which is thousands of anglers qualifying to try to get there. And then at just throwing out some names, if you know local and regional competition, Kobe Carden from Alabama made multiple classics, I believe. I know he's made at least one classic. I'm going to give him some credit and say multiple, but
I believe you're right.
He was leading that event at the Ouachita River going the final day. Matty Wong right behind him. He beat out Kobe Carden. And then the other two guys to make the classic that were in the nation field, which is obviously the top three anglers make the classic. You've got Jared Miller, former Elite Series pro, most famously known for the shot below the Jordan Dam there with the really rough current and kind of got sucked up by the current there. And then you have Taylor Smith from the state of Washington, but has qualified to the classic from the nation multiple times. So he beat out, just listing those three anglers that made the final day. Those three anglers are studs regionally, locally, and obviously nationally. So I will say even the nation qualifiers really have to earn it in their respect. So we're going to move on to Mercury Drain the Lake, and we're going to do this pretty quick. We've kind of given a lot of good reasons. Some of our picks will overlap, but this one, like we said, one and done. You pick an angler in week one of the season, you can't pick him the rest of the year. So don't dwell on, well, I picked Todd Auten in this event and he got 6-7 events later. I'm sorry. I mean, I would have picked him twice if I could too, but you can only pick him once. Makes it very interesting. You got to keep everything. You got to keep this week in play. You got to keep next week. You got to keep the end of the season in play, picking your team. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give 4 of my picks, and then you give 4 of your picks. If there's any little point to touch on it. And then I'll do my last 4 and you do your last 4. But I'm going to say, hold on one second. Let me just mark some guys that I've duplicated just so I can put them in there. Todd Auten, Luke Palmer, Clark Wendlandt, and KJ Queen. I'm going to go ahead and say those 4 guys: Todd Auten, Luke Palmer, KJ Queen, and Clark Wendlandt. I picked Clark in both. KJ's had a good finish there. He's going to go into his second year. And then I think the moving bait bite could be a deal, obviously, if there's not sight fishing going on. And so I think Todd Auten and Luke Palmer love to cover water, whether it's a spinnerbait or a chatterbait. So those 2 guys are going to be my those 3 guys are my new ones. Clark Wendlandt, obviously, I mentioned him for Rapala as well.
So my first 4 would be, I'm actually going from bottom up, although there's really no order. I'm going John Cruz as a duplicate for both. Brian Schmidt, Derek Hudnall, and Jesse Tacarante.
Okay. That's the kind of thing that we were talking about. There's going to be about a dozen to 15 anglers that you do not pick. So you may love them, but something doesn't set up right for him. And so for a guy like Jesse Tacarante, he's now coming back to the Elite Series after a medical exemption all of last year. Right. The St. John's River, he's a Floridian. You're burning him right now because you think that he's going to do well in his home state. There's those different factors that you can go off history, you can go off location, and also style of fishing. So that's a good 4. Repeat that 4 for me one more time. John
Cruz, Brian Schmidt, Derek Hudnall, and Jesse Tacarante.
I love the Brian Schmidt pick. If Lake Champlain was on the schedule, you would have probably saved him, but yeah.
Yeah, 100%. But, okay, here's something I wanted to hit on, and I'm sure you do the same thing. When I go through there and select my 8 guys, and this might be a strategy that might help the listeners out there, is think to yourself, when you're picking that guy, have a visual picture or an actual picture of the schedule and say, do I think he has a better chance of doing well at another event? And some of my picks, I think, do I think they'll do well in other events for Drain the Lake? Absolutely. But I just try to focus in on, is this event where I think their best opportunity to do well is, right? So, I mean, if there's other events that I think Cliff Prince might do really well in this year. However, in my head, it makes the most logical sense. And I just gave away one of my picks, but I feel like that would be his best chance to either win or have a best event. And something, we haven't mentioned yet, winners for each event get double points. So, I mean, like, if you think a guy has a chance to win the tournament, that's the tournament you need to pick him on. It was like Lee Livesey at Lake Fork last year. We talked about that. Like, he could have a bad finish, like he did, the first year we were there, or like, not a great
Missed the
finish.
cut. Yeah.
But, right. But at the same point, it's like it's his best chance on paper to win an event all year. So that's kind of what you got to get. I didn't want to get too far off track there, but I want to say that's kind of a good thought process when you're picking your team.
Yeah, I think we had six Drain the Lake events last year, and I picked the winner 3 times. I picked Brian Schmidt at Champlain, I picked Lee Livesey and Wes Logan in all 3 of their victories. So it's 200 points instead of 100 points. And then if you pick the winner of the classic, it's triple points. So you're getting 300. So you're not only thinking about can they win this event, but will they be a factor in the classic? And we've seen it's kind of a small grouping of anglers who really know how to win a classic. And so it'll be interesting to see that as well. So my last 4 picks, I'm picking Mark Frazier, Shane LeHue, Cliff Prince, and Tyler Rivette. And I am blown away. Obviously, we knew Cliff Prince was close to 50% in Rapala fantasy fishing. And because you can only use him once in this, he's at 58%, one of the highest percentages we've seen for Drain the Lake. Obviously, we'll see some guys, late in the season that you pick that maybe have a higher percentage, but it's because there's less events left. For someone to be almost 60% on the first cast of the season, you're already using them. That's a very telling sign that they are a favorite. So Mark Frazier, Shane LeHue, Cliff Prince, and Tyler Rivette.
So just to jump right into my last 4, I wanted to make sure I have these correct. I also went with Cliff Prince, kind of feel like you have to. I went with Mark Menendez, wanted to use him somewhere. Like I said, I didn't use him in Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, but I did want to go with him and Drain the Lake. I went with Brian New. That was a little tricky for me to do because I think there's certainly other events that I think he'll do well in. But hard not to go with the guy that won the tournament last year, especially for Drain the Lake, at least in, the way I saw it. I can't necessarily justify it, but that's just the way I thought. And then lastly, I'm going to go with Scott Martin. Obviously didn't have a great finish here last year, but I like his odds to bounce back at the St. Johns River. And I've got him on my Drain the Lake roster.
Wow, burning a Scott Martin and a Mark Menendez early in the season. I got Mark Menendez. I got Marky Mark stored away for a little longer, a little later in the season, but that's a good solid lineup. Give me your 8 one more time.
So Cliff Prince, Scott Martin, Mark Menendez, Brian New, Jesse Tacarante, Derek Hudnall, Brian Schmidt, John Cruz. And it goes back to what we were saying too. Do I think these are going to be the 8 best guys in this tournament? Not necessarily. It's just a matter of like, you definitely have to save some, right? I mean, that's the reality of it. You don't want to blow everybody, every bucket A, type guy in the first tournament. Obviously there's no buckets, but you know what I'm saying, that qualification of guys in the first tournament. So with that being said, you like to save some guys, but find a good mixture of guys you're really confident in, and then some guys, where you might not know where else you would use them, but you have a lot of confidence they'll do well in this tournament. So just, something to consider.
If you picked the top 8 straight up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you can't win any prizes, but you're going to have a heck of a lead going into the Harris chain because that's going to be a lot of points. So I liked it. Yeah. I've got, there's some other guys that I was kind of worried about, Mark Frazier. I think that he's going to start the season strong again. I really couldn't fit a Chickamauga, Lake Oahe, Santee Cooper. I really couldn't find another place for Mark Frazier, even though he's made the classic. He's a great angler. His brother's a great angler. I just couldn't find another place that I thought that maybe he would dial it in better than maybe the St. John's. And so I think that that's one. Shane LeHue, I wanted to pick him maybe for Santee, but I got quite a few people for Santee. He's a Carolinian, but maybe hasn't spent as much time there as other places. And so it's a fine line. And I think you've got more bigger names, more winners on your team necessarily, but I still have Clark Wendlandt and Cliff Prince, 2 guys that I think could win this event, which is important for those bonus points that you can get. So that's it. That is Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. That is Mercury Drain the Lake. I'll go through my 8 one more time. Todd Auten, Luke Palmer, KJ Queen, Clark Wendlandt, Mark Frazier, Shane LeHue, Cliff Prince, and Tyler Rivette. Man, I wanted to use Rivette somewhere else as well, but he's not tremendously great at cold water. And depending what Santee, Chickamauga look like, they could still be cold. There's not a bunch of offshore grass, at Fork. They're going to probably be on ledges at Pickwick. And then you could save him all the way for the Mississippi River at the end of the year because he likes frogging and grass fishing, but that's a toss up as well on dialing in 3.5 to 4 pounders instead of just 3 pounders. So we'll get into all of that, but episode 2 of 2022, I think this is episode 64 or 65 overall, but for the podcast, glad to have it back. Kyle, be safe. Going down to Florida, you're going to be there for the first 2 Elite Series events. We will check in with you before the Harris Chain. Obviously, these buckets will lock Thursday at takeoff for the Elite Series event, and they will unlock with the new event for the Harris Chain opening up after the weigh-in on Sunday evening. So keep an eye out for that. Also, something cool we're doing this year, Mike Sucon, and Tommy Sanders, and all 3 of us, we have picked our entire Drain the Lake rosters for the whole season before the season starts. It's a different thing. I'm doing it on paper because you can't have multiple team names in fantasy. You just have one account. So I'm doing it on paper, and we're projecting the whole season and locking up our whole picks there. Some of my picks per event will not match those, but we will have some bragging rights to see who forecasted the season better. And it was very difficult to know what the heck's going to happen on some of these bodies of water, not only a couple weeks out, but like 5 months out. So it's going to be very interesting. And I want to see how close we get. And maybe I'm better at projecting the whole season than I am at event by event. So we will see that. But Kyle, you got any last thoughts for fans tuning in and doing fantasy fishing if they're still listening to this about an hour into the podcast?
I'm going to guess that everybody's just excited for the season to start as I am. So I don't have to do a whole lot of talking into trying to get somebody to watch. Obviously, tune in to Bassmaster.com this weekend, FS1. It should be an awesome event. Obviously, I know we all look forward to the first event of the season, opening day, if you will, if you're a baseball guy. I'm just really looking forward to it, and I'm excited to get down there and get the season started.
So for the times for Bassmaster Live this coming week for the Elite Series event at the St. John's on Eastern time, it's going to be 8 to 3 Thursday and Friday on Bassmaster.com, 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., 7 hours of fishing content those 2 days. Then we're still going to do 8 to 3 on Saturday and Sunday, but 8 to noon Eastern time will be on Fox Sports 1, both Saturday and Sunday. So instead of 3 hours per day or 3 hours for each day of the weekend on Fox Sports 1, we will have 4 hours. We'll also have Dave Mercer, Davey Height involved as well. We will have Mark Zona in studio with Tommy and Such and myself. It's going to be great. We got a brand new studio set that we kind of modified this off season, and we're buttoning up all the stuff and fixing all the lighting this week for the event. So 8 to 3 Eastern time, those are the times. Bassmaster.com exclusively Thursday and Friday. We're going to share the time on .com and Fox Sports 1 Saturday and Sunday. So excited to bring you guys that content. Kyle's going to bring some great updates from the water. I think you're going to be buzzing around with my dad once again on the water or something like that. I don't even want you two in the same boat together of the trash you're going to talk about me, but I'll have to get filled in on it later. So I appreciate you joining me, ma'am. And I'm excited that we're doing this podcast, and we will get after it in the next one, previewing the Harris Chain. But for that note, this was the St. John's River Fantasy Fishing Preview on Inside Bassmaster Podcast.